Welcome to another episode of It's Going to Be Alright. My name is Niklas Mitrovic.
And I am Clayton Gwen, suffering from a bit of a cold, so I apologize for sniffles, sneezes, coughs. It is not corona, but it's just a common cold.
Yeah, but it's still not cool.
No. So if I sound a little stuffed up, it's not because I'm full of myself.
But today we're going to talk about something that we called mentorship, or in other words, getting help from other people.
Sort of the behind the scenes and the unacknowledged roles in research writing, the things that we probably take a lot for granted, the things that probably won't be what makes it into publications, essays, or other types of research writing or communication, but are integral. And I guess this was brought up, you were talking to me last week about a student who had brought up this idea of what do you need to acknowledge as part of being, say, a master's student writing your thesis, and where should acknowledgements go, and what's the proper way to do all of this. So we thought, hey, maybe now is a bit of a good time to talk about some of this behind the scenes stuff.
I think so, because the actual question was, hey, I'm getting help from one of my good friends, and I was wondering if this is something that I should address in the methods chapter. And is this the traditional way of doing it? I've never heard about it. So my immediate response was, a question like that can be answered fairly easily. No. That's not standard. You don't write that you have gotten help from a friend in your methods chapter. It might be a part of the acknowledgements, but many times it's not even addressed there. Certain things are, but let's say that you get help from the writing center, your dad, a friend, or even your professor. What do you think?
For me, it comes down to kind of understanding the difference between, mentorship as part of a learning process and assistance that you go through versus professional assistance, things and services that you might end up using as part of your data collection and analysis. I would say from the standpoint, I agree with you, the simple answer is no. You don't need to acknowledge this stuff. Because particularly for something like a method section, what's important is that the people who are reading your research are able to replicate what you are attempting to do or what you have done. So is mentioning your friend who gave you a bit of help in using the statistical program R necessary as part of your methods? No, what's more important is what analysis did you use in the program R, why did you choose it, and what were the results that came from that statistical analysis. But I think this brings up a really good question of, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. And we were just talking an episode or 2 episodes ago, I can't quite recall, about co-authorship and the importance of knowing roles and responsibilities for people who are going to be titled
it's like 2
authors.
episodes ago, I think.
Yeah. So this comes at a good time. Here,
it comes at a good time, and it's okay. You mentioned this friend. Let's say that you got help with your friend with some statistics, or to write a couple of neat paragraphs, or to explain a theoretical concept. It doesn't really matter what it is. The point is that other people will not have access to the same friend, to this particular person, and that's kind of an important aspect, because you really want this to be quantifiable, and getting in touch with the exact same person doesn't matter if it's a friend, someone working at the library, or maybe a writing advisor. Getting an appointment with the same person is not possible for someone in Canada, or someone in the United States, or someone in Bergen. So we had a little bit of a discussion a couple of days ago when kind of prepping for this particular episode, and let's say that you are it doesn't have to be within the natural sciences, but a lot of times these people are using different softwares to create statistics and stuff like that. And that is mentioned. And you could say that a program or a software like that is an object to a certain extent. But when you get help from a person, a subject, then it's not addressed.
And that's probably the clearest distinction that you can make to help yourself. Is it something that is objective, repeatable, that you can replicate it, everybody can have access or should be able to, through the right channels, get access, and what you plug into it will produce a similar, if not the same result? Or is it subjective? Because even if you have access to the same friend, the same supervisor, the same writing advisor, the same mentor, are you going to get the exact same perspective? And then on top
Probably
of that,
not.
is your subjective interpretation of that going to be exactly the same either? So how do we kind of approach some of these things, and where is that line between, especially when we start dealing with ideas or suggestions that people give us, what's the line between it being something that should be reported or something that should be communicated that it came from someone else to avoid plagiarism? And this is where it gets really, really tough. There are some easy ways. If you are doing personal communications with people, say you're using interviews or focus groups as methodology, you're probably collecting notes, you're maybe recording these conversations, you're gathering data in something of a systematic way. So yeah, that belongs to your methods. That's going to inform the results and your discussion. Will these necessarily be repeatable with the exact same group of people? Maybe, maybe not. Things can change over time. But that is part of your data and your data collection. But on the other side, you have kind of the ideas and the thought processes that help to form some of these ideas for how you'll collect data, how you'll analyze, how you'll discuss what sort of analytical tool or maybe analytical concept or theory you're going to use. And that's where the line gets a bit more grayed. So some people, you may end up actually being familiar with this. You're reading some sort of research and you see personal communication in either parentheses or square brackets. And that's a form of citing that you have been speaking to somebody and you're taking their specific ideas from some kind of a personal communication that was recorded, be it digitally, be it a letter, a handwritten letter, be it handwritten notes from a conversation or interview, or be it, that you've actually transcribed it from a personal communication that was the audio and or video was recorded. But we don't do a lot of that stuff most of the time, do we? Like, no. You and I record our conversations a lot as a podcast, but the other stuff that we do in preparation is not...
No, not recorded. And we had a really nice conversation about this, which we probably should have recorded because now we have to have the same conversation again. Yeah. So that's kind of a good example. But you made me think about, let's say that you should include any kind of substantial idea that you have gotten from someone else in your methods chapter. Where's the starting point there? Because there are certain examples that are quite easy. Let's say that you had some kind of a conversation with your supervisor about how to structure interviews. Then maybe that should be included. But the way that you decided to ask questions, or maybe certain theoretical concepts that you decided to use to interpret what happened during the interviews, that's something that you learned 12 years ago from another professor.
Or from your research methods course, if you had one of those as a bachelor or a master or as a PhD.
So it makes it really hard to decide what should be included and what shouldn't be included, because there is no real starting point to a lot of these different ideas. They are maturing as you grow, as you think, as you connect different ideas, and it just gets impossible to include all that because it might not be that... I mean, then you're going to have to keep track of everything you said to anyone.
Yeah.
Ever.
That's a huge amount of data to try to get through. But realistically, you also need to look at the situation. Is your supervisor or a mentor, a writing advisor, a friend, are they suggesting a concept or a theory that they're familiar with? Now, that wouldn't then be their own idea. They would be directing you towards an idea that you could find and then pull sources from, either to develop a methodology, to develop a theoretical or conceptual framework that is guiding the reasons why you're doing your research and why you're collecting data in certain ways, or maybe it's those theories or analytical tools that are helping you analyze the results.
And that is the case in a lot of these. A little bit of a mini story time. When I was a lecturer at the Østfold University College and working with pedagogy, a lot of these students were supposed to write kind of like a thesis, like a bachelor's thesis. They were not bachelor's students, but the term paper was kind of like a bachelor's thesis. And everyone had a supervisor, and I remember in conversation with one of my colleagues, she said that, for a lot of these students, I basically write the entire thesis. I tell them what to include in their methods chapter. I tell them what to include in their theory chapter. I tell them how to interpret their data from their practicum. I tell them how to structure the entire text. And I saw some of these notes that she sent over to a lot of these different students, and it was quite substantial. So, even though she directed these students towards relatively well-known theories or ways to structure an academic text, it was still a substantial contribution, and there are different ways to do it. So in a way, she was more than visible in the finished product.
Yeah, and there is a fine line that is being walked there. That, okay, if it is for something that is not going to be published, you're not putting it out to the news, you're not trying to claim ownership of it within the public sphere in some way. It's not going to a peer-reviewed journal, but these are course essays that really don't become much beyond that. It gets a bit gray there, because often what ends up happening is, well, we end up wanting to write for our professors because they're the one who is giving us the grade. We want to say what they want to hear so that we get the good grade. But what about for something like a master's thesis, which may be the foundation for your PhD research, as was the case for somebody like me, or is something that for a few colleagues that I have across different departments is the foundation for, the first articles that they are going to end up writing. These lines start to get blurred a little bit more. And, are you using theories or data or concepts or specific ideas that are the creation of someone like your mentor, your supervisor, for example? That it's a clear idea that they've developed, maybe a phrase that they have coined. But in that case, you're probably citing them and some of their more recent publications demonstrating where you're getting this idea from anyways. But I guess the point of a lot of this is that these are just sort of questions that are really taken for granted as part of the research and, more often than not, the learning process. And these questions probably arise because there's different expectations of roles and responsibilities depending on you, your supervisor, your discipline, personal ideas, personal values, as well as just different cultural norms. If you come from a different educational or cultural background from somewhere else in the world, your understanding of how these things are supposed to work can and probably are going to be very different from the person who's acting as some kind of a mentor for you.
I feel like you touched upon something very important, because there is I wouldn't say a clear line, but there's a difference between being a student and being a professional researcher. And by a professional researcher, I also include PhDs. Because it seems like you just said the word learning process. And if you're a bachelor's student or you're working on your master's thesis, a lot of these people are there to help you. And their job is they're a professional educator. So they're not supposed to be included in the paper unless you decide to cite them for some reason. So the difference here is that as a professional researcher getting professional advice, that might change the game a little bit. And then we go back to the episode we had, I think it was episode 5, about co-authorship. If they give some kind of a substantial contribution throughout the entire process, then they are qualified to be a co-author, according to the, what is it called? The
Vancouver Protocol.
Exactly. But it's not really the same with the master's thesis, and I think my story from my previous job is a really good example, because according to the Vancouver Index Protocol, then that person would be qualified as a co-author. But since this was something that was the equivalent of a bachelor's thesis, that was not really the case, and it was not really a question. It never got. I mean, it was pretty much understood from the beginning that her name would not be in the text in the paper. That would not be. She would not be a co-author. So her role as a professional educator was the deciding factor here, and not as a colleague. Because if this would be a PhD student, then the roles might be a little bit different.
Yes. So for a listener, it's going to ultimately come down to you deciding what is the goal of the writing that you're doing. If it's a course assignment, you need to almost look beyond the immediate requirements of that course assignment. Write a 5-page paper, 3,000-4,000 words on a topic talked about in this course. This is one of the other things that goes kind of behind the scenes that's taken for granted, that not a lot of people really focus on. They think, I'm just supposed to follow instructions and demonstrate that I have read the material and can find things. No, this is also at early stages in a bachelor or first year master's, when you're writing these sorts of assignments, they're professional training. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes. The purpose of these is also to see that you can develop, you can take an idea, you can do research, you can manage your time, you can really address the problem that you've been asked to. You can find appropriate evidence. You can structure your ideas in a way that makes sense. You can support those ideas. It's so much more than just giving the professor what they want. It's part of a learning process in scientific research, literature-based research, critical thinking, and embedded in all of those kind of behind-the-scenes processes, the stuff that we always talk about as the pre-writing stage, which in season 1 we've got a full episode where we discuss pre-writing. All of those sorts of things are really where a lot of these complex and ever-evolving thought processes are going on, which will not be something that you write about. You don't write about the conversations that you've had with friends or classmates. You don't write about the number of times you tried to clarify or explain an idea to somebody that you are close to, a friend, family member, partner, spouse, cat, dog, whoever it may be, as you're working through the process of how am I supposed to stick all of these ideas together.
All this deep conversation you have with the plant when you're just organizing your thoughts, that should be included in the methods chapter. Yeah. No, but think about how impossible it would be to navigate a text like that with so many different ideas. It would be like stream of consciousness kind of style text, and it wouldn't really fit into the academic tradition very nicely either, because it would be difficult to localize which idea is talked about at different places. So I think here that we're talking about, as you said, the learning process as a master's student. You're supposed to learn the skills. The result is not really that important. When we talk about a PhD or a postdoc project, the result is more what we're looking for, because this is your professional job. You have to deliver something. But as a master's student, it's all about learning the skills. And you need people to help you with that. And that's their that's what they do. Like the Learning Center help people with writing. There's someone dealing with statistics. You can get help from your professor in how to combine or understand different concepts or theories, or how to operate certain machinery. how to do something in the laboratory. So there is a difference here. The learning process, let's say the focus is on the learning process, not the results. But when you're a professional researcher, the tables are turned in a way.
Mm-hmm. So let's put this into perspective. I'll give you a bit of story time on my side. When I go and speak with one of my 2 supervisors to talk about where I am and what I am thinking and do my ideas make sense to them, and they say, you might be interested in looking at this book or reading this author or looking into this concept or this theory by this person or these people. That contribution is not something that I need to write about anywhere in my research. No. They're offering tools, they're offering alternatives, and the responsibility is on me to go and investigate them and see, do these fit, do these make sense? It's very often that what the supervisors are doing in that mentorship role is they're offering suggestions from where they stand, what they are familiar with, and how they would interpret something. And there's often some value in that. I mean, of course, a lot of people also walk away thinking, oh, my supervisor said I should do this, I need to do this. And they kind of get lost in these details of trying to apply new theories or concepts that don't nicely fit into the puzzle that you're trying to piece together. And so you're sitting there, trying to hammer them into place instead of realizing, hey, those suggestions they gave me, it gave me some new interesting ideas, but it's not relevant, it doesn't fit, I can't make it work. They're kind of not contradictory, but they're just opposing enough that you can't fit them together in something that becomes cohesive.
And sometimes, a lot of times, I mean, when I'm having the role as a supervisor for a student, sometimes you just come up with cool ideas. I mean, so it doesn't necessarily, they don't have to apply it. It's just an interesting perspective or something that they could think about. And sometimes when you think back at a conversation like that, maybe I said something that kind of pushed them in the wrong direction. If they try to apply this, then that's going to take a long time. They're going to alter their text a lot. So as a supervisor, sometimes you think back at these conversations and, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And I think that also, I think a professor has the same experience from time to time, because a lot of these students take it very serious. So they really want to apply that because they think that if I don't do it, then it's not going to be good. That's not what they want. Yeah. But that's not necessarily the case, or at least for me. Maybe for someone else, but not for me.
It depends on if you're part of a larger project that has mandates and goals that you're supposed to be working towards, and the project leader or your supervisor sees that you're starting to stray too far from that. But when you're doing independent research, that's something I think you need to be very careful of. Mentorship is just that. It's mentorship. It's trying to guide you in a good direction and give you different perspectives that you can use. But you all ultimately have to sit there and kind of take this in and critically think about it. Is it relevant? Is it useful? Do I have time? Did I explain myself clearly enough that the feedback and comments and ideas that I'm getting from these conversations with mentors is pragmatic to what I am trying to do, or is it kind of way distant from it? And so maybe now is a good time to just sort of go and talk about this idea that maybe this is not the most polite way to describe it, but when can research projects sort of become hijacked?
Well,
so what do we mean by that? We should maybe start out. This isn't some malicious intent or anything, but where often I would say it's when supervisors or other people who are kind of loosely involved really kind of start twisting research in a way that makes it very different from what the researcher, be it a master's student or a PhD who's working on an independent project, is trying to accomplish, to the point that the data and the direction of the research no longer really overlaps with the original intention, and things kind of go a totally different way that maybe ends up benefiting the supervisor more than it benefits the researcher?
Well, good question. And I think hijacking a project could mean a lot of different things. Like the story I just told from my previous job, that's also kind of a way to hijack a project, but with the best intentions, obviously. But it's
it's not malicious.
it's
No.
No. But it's not an individual effort anymore because they actually do so much behind the scenes and it's never addressed. So it's kind of a way to hijack something. And as you said, sometimes you could also. This is something that I'm actually in the middle of right now. I'm not going to say the name of the project or anything, but I'm supervising a student, and this person have been gathering lots of data, but they have the problem formulation and the theories that the student want to use doesn't really fit with the data they have collected. So what do you do as a supervisor? You kind of have to, suggest to alter the problem formulation, use different theory in order to fit the data that you have collected. So that's also a way to hijack a project, but once again with the best intention,
Exactly.
because things doesn't fit. So we need to do some major changes. If that doesn't happen, this probably won't go too well.
Mm-hmm. And that would be, I suppose, the difference between good mentorship, where someone who has experience and can see research design problems, which is probably something we should also have a podcast on, and how that sort of filters down into the types of questions you ask and the types of methods you use for the types of data you collect. If those are misaligned, someone who has more experience or that kind of neutral third-party perspective, they're probably there with the best intentions to help you make your project make sense. But of course, I've also heard the horror stories. I'm not saying that this happens all the time and that this happens to everybody, but in select cases I have heard where the student kind of ends up doing a bunch of research that is more beneficial for their supervisor or project leader than it ends up being for them. They end up doing a bunch of additional data collection that isn't useful for them. They end up doing a bunch of analysis that isn't useful for them. They're doing a lot of writing that isn't useful for them. So again, this is a very gray area, and you have to be responsible for yourself.
They're kind of like an unpaid research assistant, where they take the downfall. And there's another way to do this also, and this is something that you see in more like professional research. And a lot of times PhDs the project can be hijacked in such a way that, let's say that you had a conversation with some kind of academic superstar that just happened to work in your institution. It's time to publish, and they want their name on the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about this in episode 5 when we talked about co-authorship. So even though there's certain things that needs to be in place in order for that to happen, it seems like it can get overridden so easily because of other things, politics within the university. You really want to work together with this person because that might help your career. There's lots of different things that might lots of different factors that you need to take into consideration, and that's also a way to hijack a project because they basically get cred for something that they haven't really done anything
through the guise of mentorship, giving you ideas and direction to do and complete your research. And I mean, I can feel that this happens on the other side too. We shouldn't just talk down on supervisors because a lot of them are really trying to do good work.
Most of them are trying to help you as much as they can.
Exactly. There's also responsibility on your behalf as a student researcher or as a PhD as well. Are you coming to supervisors asking for topics because you don't have an original critical thought or interest in anything? Maybe that's not a good starting point to conduct research. You should have some kind of interest in there so that you're seeking out people who can provide relevant, useful guidance because of their expertise, not because you're just looking for the kind of what we would call the spoon-fed solution, which is, one thing I hear a lot of professors talk about. Students just want to be spoon-fed. Tell me what to do, tell me how many pages, tell me how many citations, tell me what the topic is, and then I'll just do it. That's not enough to be a researcher. You need to have a kernel a grain of sand of a good idea that's worth pursuing, that you have an interest in, or you're not going to appreciate the master's research you do, or any of the course assignments that you do, or if you end up as a PhD, the research that you're doing for 3 or 4 years. So that's a very important thing too, is realizing that there are kind of these other hidden things that are easy to take for granted, especially if you are just like, oh, well, there's a cool opportunity and everything's lined up for me. I just have to do the work. Well, you still have to produce some original contribution as part of that project team. It's not just to do the work. You would have been better off to have gotten paid as a professional researcher than to take a PhD, for example.
But kind of back to the initial question, because once again, I was working, or this student that asked us to do this particular podcast is working on the methods chapter for her master thesis, and she have gotten a lot of help from a friend. And talking about hijacking, I mean, that friend is not hijacking the project in any way. The student asked her friend for help because she happens to know a lot about a particular method, or maybe she asked her, do you have any suggestions? Or how should I make this work? What is the best way to do this project in order to answer my problem formulation? So in this case, we're talking about friends, supervisors, other employees at the university, writing advisors, family, parents. They're all there, and they might help you through different conversations. It might be very concrete, it might be relatively unconcrete, just having a conversation and kind of organizing your thoughts. That should not be included in your methods chapter, even though it happens, and it's a crucial part of research. I think any professional researcher can say that conversations they have with other researchers, with friends, is an extremely important part of the process, and
hugely
a lot
valuable.
of these to be honest, a lot of these projects would never exist if these conversations never happened.
I think you bring up some really good points, that mentors can be more than just your supervisor. And I think it's important that you also understand who you're going to, when you're going to them, and what you're going to them for, why you're going to them, because you need to understand that different people can help you with different problems at different points in your research and your writing. So if you're taking a course essay, or a course that has an essay as part of one of the assignments you must do, or you're writing a master's thesis, talking with your friends, particularly people who come from the same program, they'll have some background. They could be really good to help you kind of clarify troubling questions that you have. Am I being clear about kind of my problem formulation or the research question? Do I justify why this research is important well enough? Through the writing process, it can be very useful to talk to non-specialists, other friends, family members. Are my ideas clear? Can you kind of understand, even if you don't know the technical aspects of it, can you understand what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it? And can you develop an understanding from reading my work or from listening to me tell you about it? Going to your supervisors for more of the technical support. Is this a good research question? Is this a good methodology? Is this a good research design? What are the ethics issues that I might have to face with this?
Or other students in the same program could also be kind of the expert here. I think if the people that are listening or watching really wants a good example when it comes to trying to explain something as simple as possible, and complex ideas are difficult to explain using just plain language sometimes, and in order to do so, you really need to know what you're talking about. There is a bunch of videos on YouTube. I think it's like a channel where different people, sometimes it's like theoretical physicists, trying to explain like the fourth dimension to a 5-year-old, right? I think that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of those pop up. I've never watched them, but
no,
I don't know what the channel is called. Do you?
Not really, but they explain it to like a 5-year-old maybe, and then like a 10-year-old, and then a teenager.
I'd say The YouTube channel called Think Big is also one where you can listen to a variety of different people talk about very deep questions, political, scientific, philosophical, and I think that they really seek out people who are good at clearly explaining these complex issues, complex ideas in simple ways.
So the point here is that when I'm lecturing, talking about academic writing, I always tell people to, try to explain your ideas to someone who doesn't really know what you're talking about. That's probably one of the most powerful technologies that you have. Because it is something about really understanding what you're trying to say. And sometimes that might result in a really, really good and to the point explanation, and that's what you should write in your thesis.
Yes.
And remember to add a citation because it might not be your idea. But the point here is that if I advise people to do this, and I'm not saying that, or let's say that I'm advising people to do this, but for some reason I shouldn't mention that this should be included in the methods chapter. No, I would say that you don't have to include it in the methods chapter, but it's an important thing to do anyways. It's very helpful, but it's not really a method that you have to write anything about, because everybody does it, or at least everybody should do it to some extent.
And one thing that I think is very important is the Writing Center has professionally trained staff from a variety of different study backgrounds and levels of education with a focus on improving your writing communication skills. So the number of years that I have seen bachelor, master, PhD students from pretty much every single department at NMBU, having someone that you can come and talk with specifically about these struggles as you're trying to write things, be it your pre-writing stage, be it your, writing your methods, you're trying to write your discussion, you're trying to write your introduction, no matter what it is, the number of times that people have come in and sat beside me for the 30, 45-minute consultation, and they can come back week after week after week. So you kind of get a bit more time than you would with any other mentor throughout a semester. But people would sit down and I would just get them to say, okay, you've got 30 pages. I don't have time to read that. Can you tell me in 2 minutes or less, what is it that you're researching? And then what is the problem that you're trying to face? And now we can focus in and we can work on that. And very often I've had people who, PhDs who have come up to me and said, I really wish I had came here 3 or 4 years ago, because working in that way, having someone who helps me to address that big problem instead of this very narrow specific problem with, is this the correct methodology to produce this sort of result? Well, that wasn't really what they were struggling with. They were struggling with trying to understand how to fit too many ideas into a single paper. And their supervisors...
So the problem was started a long time ago.
Yes, and their supervisors had helped them very well within the methods and the results, but they were too microscopic in their focus that they couldn't help this person overcome a much larger kind of conceptual or structural issue. And they came back the next week with 2 different articles, fully written. And it's like, okay, now we can start getting to work here, and you can see how these feed across each other. So it's also important not just to know that you can have different mentors for different stages, but different mentors are very useful for very different roles and responsibilities. It's probably not your supervisor's intention to sit there and help you with the writing structure, even though a lot of them will. They think they're helping with writing structure, and what they're doing is they're grammatically spell checking and proofreading, which I think is not useful if you're still dealing with issues of the general structure, logical flow, and cohesion of your ideas, which we've talked about before, and you can go see the revision roadmap video on our YouTube channel to get a better understanding of what I'm talking about here.
Just a cool little story. Once again, we're going to talk about physics, but
all right.
I think I read in the book. It was written by Michio Kaku. He's like a theoretical physicist that writes a lot of great literature. He's relatively famous, and he was talking about the unified field theory, and that is trying to combine quantum mechanics and general and special relativity. So the problem is, it's very difficult to unify them. And he explains this as trying to duct tape a chair to a whale or something like that.
Yeah.
It was something like that. And the point is that this is kind of similar to what you said, because students, maybe a PhD, will come into the writing center. They try to distill their PhD or an article down to a couple of sentences, and they just can't do it. It's hard. It's difficult. And it turns out that the bigger question, I've been thinking too much about the technicalities, and now maybe there are some really big structural problems with some of the bigger questions that I haven't really figured out, and this kind of problem has just continued, and I've tried to adjust and I tried to do a lot of different things, but I can't really solve the problem. You have to go back to the beginning. So all these conversations are extremely useful to organize your thoughts and see how, what are the underlying mechanics in this kind of project, and how do I make them work as good as possible.
I think a good way to get the best mentorship that you can is also to think about the different stages that you're going to go through as you're conducting any type of research. So who would be appropriate to help you out to make sure that your research design, your research questions, your data collection method is sound? That's probably going to be your supervisor or somebody else within your department or some other professional researcher. This could be a past professor that you had a very good relationship with. The number of times that I have gone and spoken with professors who I had taken courses with 4 or 5 years ago, because they were focused on things like methodology, and they were kind of my primary resource because I knew that they were specialists in this stuff. Then going on and thinking, okay, so what about the theories, the concepts, the more maybe practical designs of data collection and analysis, and sort of which methods are useful for data collection versus analysis, and which theoretical concepts or theories are useful for analysis, because those can also be different. And same thing, that might be your professor, that might be someone else that has a lot of experience with these ideas. Then when it comes to something like organizing your ideas, organizing your literature, organizing and preparing for writing, writing advisors at the NMBU Writing Center are really great mentors for that sort of thing. And then realizing that there's an editorial responsibility, the spell checking, the proofreading, the formatting, all of this stuff that needs to be done at the end. Don't get bogged down by trying to do this stuff before you even have, your essay or your thesis fully written. But there's a lot of people who help with that. Some supervisors really spend a lot of time focusing on an editorial role. Writing advisors, we're able to help you edit for certain aspects of things like cohesion, clarity, and concision. Librarians are perfect to help you with all of the citation, referencing formats, using the different tools that are there. And also, there are people who work as paid editors to help you do final proofread, final grammar checking.
And a lot of people use family members.
Yeah.
I remember I used my grandmother when I was writing my master's thesis. She was spell checking me, and I didn't mention her in the methods chapter, but I mentioned her in the acknowledgements. And I thanked her for that, helping me out in this project, because my writing was pretty messy when I was younger. And maybe still is. The point is that, so what should be in the acknowledgements? Because that could be an interesting... We've been talking about all these different people that might help you out in the writing process and might be very important for your project, but a lot of these people shouldn't be mentioned in the methods chapter or any other place in the main part of the paper, but the acknowledgements might be a good place to give these people some credit. I remember in my master's thesis, I obviously thanked my grandmother for all the help with spell checking. Also my parents, and especially my dad, because I remember I was super stressed out, and he was telling me that, we should go to the cabin, we go for a couple of walks a day, and then you write. And that was very helpful for me at that stage in the process, because I was really, really stressed out, and I felt like I hit like a
hit
wall.
The wall. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also my grandfather, because I had certain conversations with him where I tried to explain different things to him, and that was, as these videos that I was just talking about on YouTube, I just had to speak in a different way because he didn't knew a lot of these different concepts. So I also thanked him in the acknowledgements, and he unfortunately died in the process. So it was kind of dedicated to his memory.
Sad to hear.
Yeah, he was old, and it's a long time ago. Yeah. But thank you anyways. But so I kind of dedicated my master's thesis to him. Mm-hmm. That was in the acknowledgements, and I remember they were placed in the beginning of my thesis.
Yeah. If you're curious about where acknowledgements should be placed, you can go through the NMBU BibSys system. I believe it's BibSys or Aurea?
I think it's BibSys, yeah.
And NMBU is a repository for all publications that come out of NMBU. So master's theses, PhD dissertations, and CUPAs, many other of the professors' research is, if it's open access, it should be stored there, I believe. You can go and find and filter by field, by discipline, by year. If you know people who graduated before you, you can go and look over theirs. The acknowledgements is a great way of doing exactly that, acknowledging people who were able to help you at different stages in a way that was meaningful and constructive and practical to the development of the research publication that you have ended up doing.
And I also thanked my supervisor.
Yeah.
In the acknowledgements.
That's
for
a pretty
all the
common
support,
one.
helping me out. Yeah, it's a pretty common one. And I think this is the right time to talk a little bit about plagiarism. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it earlier, 20 minutes ago maybe, but this is something that we should talk a little bit about, because maybe your supervisor gives you a really, really good idea, or another student, or someone at the library. Maybe you talk to me in the learning center, or you for that sake. You shouldn't be afraid to use some of these ideas in your paper if it comes from one of these people that are a professional. They are
you'd say professional educator.
Professional educator, right. That's their role, and if you're a master's or bachelor student, this is a learning process and we're supposed to help you. So all these ideas that we give you, you should not worry about plagiarism in that case, stealing our ideas, because there's a reason we give them to you. Mm-hmm. We try to help you.
They're conceptual tools to help advance the work that you're doing. Now, of course, it's very different if you're working on a project and somebody says, hey, I've got this great idea for a patent that I'm trying to do research on, and if I can get this to work, it'll be intellectual property rights and money for me. Like,
sure.
Obviously, you'll find yourself.
It's different. But if I say maybe you could use this, that's interesting combined with that kind of idea. That made me think about something. Mm-hmm. If something were extremely important to me, then I would probably not even mention it. Yeah. So if I suggest that you could do something, don't worry about plagiarism. Don't worry about stealing my ideas. And you shouldn't be worried about stealing your supervisor's ideas either, because whatever they say about your project, it's supposed to help you out.
Yeah. So think about it this way. You walk into a restaurant, you're handed the menu, and you don't know what to order, so you ask the server for what their recommendation is. And you choose to go off of what that person says is quite good. Are you stealing their idea? No. You're following a recommendation. Maybe they say, the fish soup here is really great, but you don't like fish. Well, you don't have to take their recommendation because they provided it to you. But if it doesn't work for you.
But if there's a secret recipe, and you somehow manage to get a hold of that secret recipe, and then you reproduce it and try to sell it, then it's a different situation, right?
The likelihood that many of us are going to face that, probably pretty low. But, I mean, if you're working on other research projects, if you are working on things that there's a potential patent behind it, truth be told, you'll probably know, because in some cases you might have to do things like sign a non-disclosure agreement so that you're only able to publish what the project says is publishable. There will probably be pretty clear indicators to you about the ideas needing to be protected. But when it's a recommendation, when it's a suggestion, from a mentor, someone who is trying to guide you, to ease the work that you're doing, to give you another alternative perspective, to maybe give you an answer to a burning question that has been left unresolved or that you haven't found a theoretical, a methodological, a conceptual answer to. That's all that we're really doing, be it you or I at the Writing Center or through our webinars or through our podcasts, be it your supervisor, be it a family member. I would say keep in mind that these are just suggestions to try to help you out. Getting that mentorship is very helpful because it's like, I say this so many times at the Writing Center. Often students come in and they can't see the forest for the trees. They're so focused on the small microscopic details that are so immediately in front of them that they can't step back and see the broader perspective of what it is that they're working on, which might help them to split the work apart, rearrange it, or separate it in such ways that the task becomes easier. And another case in point, suggestions that you get are not always relevant. They're just what somebody knows best about or the perspective that they would like to use. So a case in point is a colleague of mine who's taking a PhD. We often go for lunch and have talks. My supervisor suggested that I should do this, or I should do that, or I should use this theory, and I've been looking into it, but I don't really know how to make it fit. Well, then that's just it. Don't follow that suggestion.
Don't try to make it fit.
You know a little bit more about it. You now know a path that is probably not worth pursuing, and that's just as good as knowing then it kind of by process of elimination, it limits what you can actually be directing. And then, of course, I give suggestions. I would say from my standpoint, my perspective, how I understand what you're doing, maybe you could look at this, and you could look at this, and you could look at this, and just go and read the Wikipedia article on it because it's quick, it's easy, it'll give you a super good overview. And if that's what you're looking for, there's a lot of great resources and literature that you can dive into and cite, obviously. But you don't need to cite me as giving you the idea of looking at that theory or that concept because it's just a suggestion. It's up to you if you want to use it or not. And if I were to be getting any money from it, I mean, I'd make it pretty clear that I was working on commission,
Yeah. Then that should be clear from the beginning. And keep in mind that there's no difference between the natural sciences and the social sciences when it comes to this. Everybody talks to people, gets help. That's the reason you have a supervisor. They're not supposed to be a co-author, it's a supervisor, someone that helps you with through the process, and it's a learning process, and that's the focus of, let's say, a master's thesis. PhD, a little bit different. Any type of professional research is obviously different because then it's the results that matters and the final product. And the way there is obviously sometimes set up as a team that works together where they have different responsibilities. But if you borrow ideas from other people, then it's a little bit more complex. And then we might talk about that you have to include them in your project somehow. But then as a co-author, not in your methods chapter. Because once we talked a little bit about this in the beginning, that machines, softwares, objects of different kinds, that should be included in your methods chapter. But people, not so much, because it can't be quantifiable in the same way. So you could say that some kind of idea or a theoretical concept is a type of technology, but we still do a distinction between objects and subjects, between people and machines or softwares.
And in all honesty, this stuff is confusing. It's the things that are taken for granted. It's the things
because it is quite unclear.
Yeah, it's not written about. It's not put into publications. You're not going to read textbooks or methods books or published articles. This is stuff that appears in things like this, in podcasts, in blogs, in conversations, one-on-one conversations with supervisors, with other students, with other professors, with other people that you know. So if you're confused, if you don't know, it's going to be all right.
That was the fastest one ever.
I'm trying to wind him down. I know today you've got other things that you need to get to, so just trying to nail that one in there.
You didn't even see my face. I was surprised. I was like, I didn't really see it coming. Usually I can kind of tell
I ramble, I know.
I thought we would do like a little bit of what's the takeaway?
Yeah.
First. But the takeaway is no, you don't have to include it in your methods chapter. Acknowledgements, yeah, that could be a good place to thank your friend, a writing advisor, your grandmother, your unborn child, doesn't matter.
The long story short, which we answered, I think, in the first 60 minutes of this episode. So if you made it this far, well, thanks. Hopefully we gave you some good ideas, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Congratulations with the patience, and see you in 2 weeks. All right.